The diplomatic station hung in space like a silver flower, its petals made of metal and glass that caught the light of 3 distant suns. Dae-sung pressed his hand against the window of the transport shuttle and watched it grow larger. After 3 months of preparation, after 1,000 meetings and briefings and medical checks, he was finally here. Humanity's first real chance to join the galaxy. Nervous? Hana asked from the seat beside him. She was younger than him by 5 years, bright-eyed and excited in a way that made her seem even younger. Her specialty was languages, though these aliens didn't speak with sound alone. They spoke with thoughts, with colors, with movements that carried meaning humans were just beginning to understand. Should I be? Dae-sung smiled at her. In truth, he felt calm. Perhaps too calm. Back on Earth, his supervisors had worried about that. They wanted someone who could stay steady under pressure. But they also worried that his steadiness came from not taking things seriously enough. He'd assured them he understood the weight of what they were doing. Humanity's entire future might depend on the next few days. The shuttle docked with a soft thump. The airlock cycled. Dae-sung straightened his suit jacket and led the delegation through the opening doors. Ambassador Kelleth waited on the other side. He was tall, nearly 7 feet, with scales that shimmered green and gold under the station's lights. His species had been part of the Galactic Harmony Empire for over 3,000 years. When he smiled, Dae-sung could see rows of small, neat teeth that suggested his ancestors had eaten something other than plants. "Welcome," Kelleth said in perfect Korean. The translator device on his collar flickered. "We are honored to host humanity's delegation." They shook hands. Kelleth's palm was cool and dry. His grip was firm, but not challenging. Everything about him suggested careful practice, diplomatic training, that went back generations. Dae-sung wondered what it was like to come from a species that had been doing this for millennia. Humans had been in space for barely 60 years. The station was beautiful. Kelleth led them through corridors that curved in ways that shouldn't work but did, past windows that showed impossible views of stars and nebulas. They passed other aliens, dozens of species Dae-sung recognized from the briefing materials, and dozens more he didn't. Some nodded. Some ignored them. A few stared, with what might have been curiosity or concern, or something humans didn't have a word for yet. "The Empire has 847 member species," Kelleth explained as they walked. Each joined through the same process. Treaties signed in good faith. Verified through telepathic scanning. It is simple, painless, and has kept peace in the galaxy for over 10,000 years. "How does it work exactly?" Hana asked. She'd read all the materials, of course, but she was the type who liked to hear things explained in person. "The telepaths read surface thoughts only," Kelleth said. "Your current emotional state, your immediate intentions. They ensure you mean what you say when you sign the treaty. Nothing deeper, nothing private. Think of it as reading your expression, your body language, but more direct." Dae-sung nodded. It made sense. Lies were hard to maintain if someone could feel your emotions. Deception was impossible if someone could sense your true intentions. No wonder the Empire had lasted so long. They reached their quarters, a suite of rooms that had been modified for human comfort. Earth, standard gravity, oxygen mixture, temperature. Kelleth left them to rest and prepare. The signing ceremony would take place in 2 days. That night, Dae-sung couldn't sleep, not from nerves, but from excitement. He stood at the window and looked out at the stars. When he was 8 years old, living in Seoul, he'd looked up at the night sky and imagined this moment, meeting aliens, representing humanity, being part of something bigger than one planet, one species. Back then, the city had seemed so large, the world so vast. Now he was here, in a station orbiting a planet 300 light-years from home, and Earth seemed small and precious and far away. He thought about his childhood, those streets in Seoul, walking home from school, his mother teaching him which neighborhoods were safe, which weren't. His father showing him what to do if there was an earthquake. His grandmother telling him stories about the war, about surviving when everything seemed impossible. Normal memories. Normal childhood. It had seemed normal then, and it seemed normal now. The 2 days passed quickly. There were more meetings, more introductions. The Empire's representatives were polite, friendly even, though Dae-sung sensed a hint of condescension in some of them. Humanity was young. Humanity was new. They'd been to space for such a short time, had nuclear weapons for barely a century. They were children compared to species that had been traveling the stars for millions of years. But children grew up. That's what Dae-sung was here to prove. The ceremony room was circular, with a high ceiling that showed the stars above. The treaty itself was displayed on a pedestal in the center, written in Earth's major languages and in the Empire's common script. It was a simple document. Really, humanity agreed to follow the Empire's laws, to trade fairly, to resolve disputes through dialogue. In return, humanity gained access to technology, trade routes, and protection. 5 figures stood around the edges of the room. They didn't look entirely solid. They seemed to shimmer, like heat waves rising from summer pavement. These were the telepaths. Dae-sung knew that 3 of them weren't physical at all, just consciousnesses inhabiting crystalline forms. One was a being of pure energy. One was something else entirely. Something the briefing materials had failed to explain adequately. High Telepath Vrin stood at the head of the circle. Their crystalline form caught the light and threw rainbows across the floor. When they spoke, their voice came from everywhere and nowhere. We welcome humanity to this chamber. We mean you no harm. We seek only truth. Will you allow us to witness your intentions? Dae-sung stepped forward. I will. Hana and the other delegates stood behind him, watching. Ambassador Kelleth stood to the side, his expression neutral. This was just procedure. Every species did this. There was nothing to worry about. The telepaths began their work. Dae-sung didn't feel anything at first. Then, slowly, he became aware of a presence at the edge of his thoughts. It felt like someone standing just behind him, looking over his shoulder. Not threatening. Just there. He focused on the treaty. He thought about what it meant. Peace between humanity and the galaxy. A future where humans could explore the stars. Not alone, but as part of a community. He thought about his hopes, his excitement, his determination to make this work. The presence moved closer. It touched the surface of his mind like fingers trailing through water. Dae-sung stayed calm. He had nothing to hide. His intentions were good. He wanted this treaty to succeed. But the mind was a strange thing. Even when you tried to control your thoughts, others surfaced. Memories from childhood. Images from dreams. Random fragments that meant nothing but were just there, floating in the background of consciousness. The telepaths went still. Dae-sung felt the presence probe a little deeper. As if confused by something, he tried to focus more clearly on the treaty, on his current intentions, but the presence kept slipping toward other thoughts. Then he felt it. A wave of something that might have been shock, or fear, or horror. The presence recoiled. High Telepath Vrin's crystalline form flickered. One of the other telepaths, the energy being, pulsed with a sickly yellow light. Wait, Dae-sung said. What's wrong? But the telepaths weren't listening. They were pulling back, severing connections, retreating from his mind like it was burning them. 2 of them collapsed. Vrin's crystal body developed a visible crack that spread across its surface with a sound like breaking ice. Alarms began to wail. The doors burst open and security poured in, weapons drawn but uncertain who or what they were supposed to be protecting. Dae-sung stood in the center of the room, hands still raised to sign the treaty, completely confused. I don't understand, he said to no one in particular. Did I do something wrong? The scan had started so simply. High Telepath Vrin had done this thousands of times before, with hundreds of species. It was always the same. Touch the surface of a mind. Read the current emotions. Verify the intentions behind the words. Simple. Clean. Safe. Daesung's mind had felt normal at first. Calm, even. There was anticipation there, excitement about the treaty, hope for humanity's future. Standard emotions for such a moment. Vryn had almost been disappointed. They'd expected something more interesting from this new species. These humans who had come from so far away. But then something felt wrong. The emotions were layered in a way Vryn didn't recognize. Beneath the calm surface, there were other things. Dark things. Not current thoughts, just memories, but they sat there in the back of Daesung's mind like coiled springs. Vryn probed deeper, just a little. They needed to understand. Context was important for a proper reading. The first memory that surfaced was innocent enough. A young Daesung, perhaps 8 years old, walking down a city street. Seoul, the human city. Tall buildings, crowds of people, the smell of food from street vendors. But then the context flooded in, and Vryn understood what the child knew. The streets were safe during the day, but dangerous at night. The child had memorized which alleys to avoid, which strangers not to talk to. He knew this because he had been taught. He had been taught because it was necessary, because children who didn't learn these things sometimes didn't come home. Vryn pulled back slightly, confused. Why would a child need to know such things? What kind of world required children to think about danger on their way to school? Another memory surfaced. Teenage Daesung watching a screen. News footage of a storm. A typhoon, the humans called it. The images showed destroyed buildings, flooded streets, people crying over losses. Hundreds dead. Thousands homeless. But the memory wasn't traumatic. Daesung had felt sad. Yes. But also something else. Acceptance. Planning. He was already thinking about where to volunteer, how to help, what supplies his family should store for the next storm, because there would be a next storm. There was always a next storm. The casualness of it disturbed Vryn. This wasn't how minds were supposed to work. Tragedy should leave marks. Horror should create walls. But in Daesung's memory, these terrible things were just part of life. Background noise. Things that happened, and that you dealt with, and then moved on. The other telepaths were sensing the same wrongness. They moved deeper into Daesung's accessible memories, trying to understand. What they found made no sense. Memories of classroom lessons that discussed wars where millions died. Not ancient history, but recent history. Wars that happened within living memory. Wars that Daesung's own grandparents had lived through. And the children in the classroom weren't horrified. They were just learning, taking notes, accepting that their species did this to each other and somehow still survived. Memories of games. Children's games. But the games involved combat, strategy, survival, pretend weapons, pretend death. And the children laughed while playing them. Memories of stories told at bedtime. But the stories weren't gentle. They involved danger, loss, struggle. Characters died. Bad things happened. And these stories were considered appropriate for children. They were meant to teach lessons, to prepare young minds for a world that could hurt them. The youngest telepath, barely a century old, began to panic. They broadcast their distress to the others. This species is broken, they sent. Their minds are filled with death and violence and they think it's normal. Vryn tried to maintain calm, but they were beginning to understand something that terrified them. This wasn't a broken mind. This was a normal human mind. Every human mind was like this, had to be like this. Because of where they came from. More memories flooded through, unbidden now. Daesung's mind was reacting to the telepathic presence, offering up memories the way a helpful person might offer information to a curious visitor. Memories of human history. Civilizations that rose and fell. Plagues that killed half of populations. Ice ages. Droughts. Predators that hunted humans in the dark. And through it all, humans, persisting, surviving, adapting, never giving up, even when giving up would have been easier. Memories of Daesung's own losses. A grandfather who died when he was young. A friend who was killed in an accident. A relationship that ended badly and hurt for months afterward. And Daesung had just continued. He'd grieved, yes, but he'd also kept living, kept working, kept hoping, because that's what humans did. The crystalline form that housed Vrin's consciousness began to crack under the strain of what they were experiencing. This wasn't how intelligent species were supposed to evolve. This wasn't how minds were supposed to work. The galaxy's civilizations had all come from gentle worlds, where apex predators were rare, where natural disasters were mild, where species evolved in relative peace. But Earth had been different. Earth had been a nightmare world where everything wanted to kill you, and the planet itself tried to freeze you or burn you or shake you to death. And humans had not just survived it, they'd thrived in it. They'd conquered it. They'd made it home. And that meant every human mind carried the same knowledge. Death was real. Suffering was real. Loss was real. But life went on anyway. And you had to go on with it. One of the other telepaths screamed, not with sound, but with pure mental anguish. They'd touched a particularly vivid memory of a nature documentary Daesung had watched as a child. Lions hunting zebras. Blood and death in high definition. And young Daesung had watched it with fascination, not horror. The breaking point came with something so simple, it was almost absurd. Vrin found themselves in a memory of Daesung as a very young child, maybe 5 years old. His mother was reading him a bedtime story, a fairy tale about a little girl in a red hood who went to visit her grandmother. But there was a wolf. The wolf wanted to eat the grandmother, wanted to eat the little girl, and this was a children's story, a story meant to help a child fall asleep, a story considered appropriate and even educational. The little girl in the story survived through cleverness, through being cautious, through understanding that the world contained things that could hurt her. And the moral of the story, the lesson that young Daesung had learned and carried with him, was that danger existed everywhere, even in familiar places, even in the shape of things that seemed safe. You had to be smart. 5 years old, and already learning that death could come from anywhere. Vrin's consciousness couldn't process it anymore. The sheer wrongness of it. The horror of a species that taught its babies about mortality and predation and survival broke something in their understanding of how minds worked. They severed the connection. The other telepaths did the same, recoiling from Daesung's thoughts like they'd been burned. 2 of them collapsed entirely, their consciousnesses retreating into themselves for protection. Vrin's crystal body shattered partially, cracks spreading across its surface. The youngest telepath began broadcasting raw terror into the chamber, a psychic scream that sent everyone present stumbling backward. Emergency protocols activated. Alarms wailed throughout the station. Security forces rushed in, weapons drawn, looking for an attacker, a threat, something they could point their weapons at and neutralize. But there was no threat. There was just Daesung, standing in the center of the room, hand still raised toward the unsigned treaty, looking confused and a little worried. "Did I do something wrong?" he asked. Nobody answered him. The security forces were surrounding the collapsed telepaths, trying to help them. Ambassador Kelleth stood frozen, his scales pale with shock. He was staring at Daesung like he was seeing him for the first time, really seeing him, and what he saw terrified him. Hana rushed forward to Daesung's side. "What happened? Are you okay?" "I'm fine," Daesung said. He genuinely seemed fine. Calm. Unshaken. Which somehow made it worse. "I don't know what went wrong. They started the scan. And then they just stopped. Pulled away. Medical teams arrived, loading the collapsed telepaths onto stretchers. High Telepath Vryn was still conscious, but clearly damaged. Their crystalline form was dim, cracks spreading like spiderwebs across its surface. As they were carried past Daesung, they sent one last message, broadcast to everyone in the chamber. Abomination. Beautiful, terrible abomination. Then they fell silent. Ambassador Kelleth finally found his voice. Escort the human delegation to their quarters. Lock down this section. Nobody in or out until we understand what just happened. Are we prisoners? Hana asked, her hand moving protectively toward Daesung. No, Kelleth said, though he didn't sound certain. You're being quarantined. For mutual safety, the security forces moved in. Polite but firm. The human delegation was led from the chamber, back through the beautiful corridors that now felt less welcoming. Other aliens watched them pass with new expressions. Fear, curiosity, concern. Daesung walked calmly, but his mind was racing. He replayed the scan in his thoughts, trying to figure out what had gone wrong. He'd been thinking about the treaty. Yes, but also about other things. Memories. His childhood. Normal thoughts. For anyone in a moment like this. He'd been thinking about Seoul, about the streets where he grew up, about his family, about the stories his grandmother told, about school and friends and dreams of meeting aliens someday. Normal thoughts, normal memories. Why had they reacted like he'd attacked them? Back in their quarters, the doors locked behind them, Hana turned to Daesung. What did you think about during the scan? What did they see? Daesung shook his head slowly. Just memories. Nothing special. Nothing bad. Just my life. And that, though he didn't know it yet, was exactly the problem. 3 days passed before anyone came to explain what was happening. 3 days of comfortable imprisonment in their quarters, with food delivered by silent robots, and no communication with the outside. Hana spent the time writing reports that nobody asked for. Daesung spent it looking out the window, at the stars, and trying to understand what he'd done wrong. On the 4th day, the door opened. A new alien stood there, unlike any they'd seen before. She was tall and thin, with 4 arms and compound eyes that seemed to look in all directions at once. Her exoskeleton was a deep blue-green, and when she moved, she made a soft clicking sound. I am Witness Thel, she said through a translator that gave her voice a pleasant, neutral tone. I have been assigned to investigate the incident. May I enter? Please, Daesung said, standing up from his chair by the window. Thel moved into the room with precise, careful steps. She carried a device that projected holographic screens in the air between them. I need to understand what happened during the telepathic scan. I need you to be honest with me, even if you think the truth might sound bad. I'll tell you anything you want to know, Daesung said, but I still don't understand what went wrong. I was just thinking normal thoughts. That may be the problem, Thel said quietly. She manipulated her device, and images appeared in the air. Footage from the ceremony chamber, showing the moment the telepaths recoiled, showing the fear in their reactions. The telepaths experienced what they describe as severe psychological trauma from contact with your mind. High Telepath Vryn is still recovering. The youngest telepath has requested a complete memory wipe of the incident. Hana gasped. But Daesung didn't try to hurt them. He didn't do anything aggressive. I know, Thel said. That's what makes this so concerning. If he had attacked them, we would understand. If he had deliberately projected violent thoughts, we would have protocols. But he simply allowed them to read his mind, and his natural, passive thoughts were enough to cause this reaction. She turned her compound eyes to Daesung. Tell me about your childhood. The question surprised him. My childhood? It was normal. I grew up in Seoul, went to school, played with friends. My parents both worked. My grandmother lived with us. Normal family. Nothing special. What games did you play? Tag. Hide and seek. We played soldier sometimes, pretending to fight with sticks. Video games when we got older. Basketball. Normal kid stuff. Thel made a note on her device. And what stories did your grandmother tell you? Dae-sung thought back. Old stories. Folk tales from Korea. There was one about tigers, about spirits in the mountains, one about a girl who outsmarted a goblin, stories about the war, sometimes, about how hard things were when she was young, and how people survived anyway. Did these stories frighten you? Sometimes, but they were just stories. They were supposed to teach you things. Be clever. Be brave. Take care of your family. That kind of thing. Thel was quiet for a moment. Did your grandmother ever tell you stories where no one died? Where no one was in danger? Where the world was simply safe and good? Ah, Dae-sung frowned, thinking. Maybe some, but even happy stories usually had some kind of problem to solve. Otherwise, what's the story about? Another note. More images appeared in the holographic display. Images of Earth, cities, oceans, mountains, forests. Tell me about your planet. So Dae-sung did. He told her about seasons, about summer heat and winter snow, about typhoons and earthquakes, about the animals that used to hunt humans before humans learned to hunt back, about diseases that killed millions before medicine improved, about wars and disasters and all the terrible things that had happened in human history. But he also told her about the good things, about how humans rebuilt after disasters, about how communities came together in crisis, about art and music and laughter and love, about progress and hope and the determination to make tomorrow better than today. Thel listened to all of it, taking notes, saying nothing. Then she pulled up medical files. Human biology, DNA sequences, evolutionary history. Your species evolved as persistence hunters, she said. You chased prey for hours, sometimes days, until they collapsed from exhaustion. Your bodies are designed for endurance running. Your minds are designed to focus on goals despite discomfort, pain, or setbacks. Yes, Dae-sung confirmed. We learned that in school. It's why humans are good at marathons. It's also why humans are good at not giving up. Thel said. Your brains are wired to keep going when other species would stop. To keep hoping when hope seems irrational. To keep fighting when fighting seems pointless. She turned her screens to show comparative data. Most species in the Empire evolved on what humans would call paradise worlds. Mild climates, few predators, abundant resources. They developed intelligence in environments of relative safety. She pulled up images of Earth again. Your planet is classified as a Class 9 death world by our standards. Nearly everything on it is either poisonous, venomous, predatory, or environmentally hostile. The fact that your species not only survived but thrived, there is, unusual. Earth isn't that bad, Hana protested. We have beautiful places, safe places. By human standards, Thel agreed. By galactic standards, your entire planet is a nightmare. She put away the holographic screens. I need to interview each member of your delegation separately. I need to understand if this reaction was specific to Dae-sung, or if it would happen with any human. Over the next week, Thel interviewed everyone. Hana, who grew up in a comfortable suburb and thought her childhood was sheltered. Bo-mi, their security chief, who had been in the military and carried scars from real combat. Yuna, their psychologist, who specialized in trauma and thought she understood darkness. The results were consistent. Every human mind contained the same baseline assumptions. Death was real. Danger existed. Bad things happened. And you dealt with it and kept living anyway. What humans considered normal, the galaxy considered horrifying. Thel's final interview was with Bo-mi, and it went differently than the others. Bomi was older, in her 40s. With short hair and eyes that had seen violence, she answered Thel's questions directly, without sugarcoating anything. "Yes, I've killed people," she said when asked. "In combat, following orders. I don't enjoy it, but I don't lose sleep over it either. That's what soldiers do. Does this make you feel guilty? Sometimes. But guilt doesn't change anything. You do what you have to do, and then you live with it." Thel leaned back, all four arms folded. "How do you live with it?" Bomi shrugged. "The same way everyone lives with everything. One day at a time. You remember the people you've lost. You try to do better. You find reasons to keep going. You don't let the bad things win. The telepaths believe your species is dangerous. All species are dangerous if you push them hard enough," Bomi said calmly. "The question is whether we're trustworthy. And that's not something you can tell from looking at our memories. That's something you learn by working with us." When Thel filed her report with the Empire's Council, she included all the interview transcripts, all the medical data, all the comparative analysis of human psychology versus galactic norms. Her conclusion was simple and devastating. Humanity is not hostile. Humanity is not broken. Humanity is simply the product of a harsher evolutionary environment than any species currently in the Empire. Their minds are structured to handle levels of stress, trauma, and adversity that would break most of our member species. This makes them psychologically incompatible with telepathic verification. But it does not make them evil. It makes them different. The question before the Council is not whether humans are safe. It is whether the Empire is ready to accept a species that reminds us what we've forgotten. That the universe can be cruel. That survival is not guaranteed. And that hope is a choice, not a given. I recommend proceeding with extreme caution. Not because humanity is dangerous to us, but because understanding them will require us to confront uncomfortable truths about our own soft history. The report caused chaos in the Council. Half wanted to reject humanity's application immediately. Too dangerous. Too different. Too disturbing. The other half argued that rejecting them would be worse. It would create an enemy. And after what the telepaths had seen in just one human's passive memories, nobody wanted to know what an entire species of humans could do if they decided the Empire was a threat. The debate raged for days. Dae-sung and his delegation remained in comfortable quarantine, waiting for a decision that might never come. Then something unexpected happened. A ship arrived at the station. Small and old, but moving with purpose. It carried a single passenger. An elderly human man who identified himself as Elder Ki-1, a philosopher and cultural historian from Earth. He'd been sent specifically to help bridge the gap between human and alien understanding. And with him came something else. An observer from the Empire's earliest days, one of the first species to join. Someone so old they'd seen the Empire grow from a handful of worlds to the massive civilization it was now. They called themselves Silence Between Stars, and they had not spoken at a council meeting in over 3,000 years. Their arrival changed everything. Ambassador Kelleth met them at the airlock, surprised and uncertain. "Elder Ki-1. Silence Between Stars. Welcome. But I'm not sure what you hope to accomplish. The situation is delicate." The elderly human smiled gently. "I'm here to tell stories," he said. "And to listen. Sometimes, that's all it takes." Silence Between Stars said nothing. But their presence seemed to fill the space around them with weight and meaning. The council agreed to hear them out. What else could they do? When the oldest observer in the Empire decided to break their silence, you listened, even if you were afraid of what you might hear. The council chamber was built to impress. It was enormous, with seats arranged in rising tiers that could hold representatives from hundreds of worlds. Today, only the core members were present, 50 beings from 50 different species, all watching as Elder Ki-1 stood in the center of the floor and prepared to speak. Dae-sung and his delegation sat in a special section, still technically under quarantine but allowed to attend this hearing. High Telepath Vrin was there too, their crystalline form still bearing visible cracks from the incident. They sat apart from everyone else, silent and watchful. Silence between stars floated near the ceiling, a being of light and shadow whose species had no name that humans could pronounce. They had existed for so long that even the Empire's oldest records couldn't agree on when they'd been born. And they had not spoken in council for millennia. Elder Kiwan looked small, standing in the center of such a vast space. He was 78 years old, with white hair and a face lined by decades of laughter and sorrow. He wore simple clothes, nothing formal or ceremonial. He looked like someone's grandfather, not a diplomatic representative. Ambassador Kelleth spoke first, his voice amplified to fill the chamber. Elder Kiwan, you requested this hearing. You claim you can help us understand what happened during the telepathic scan. The floor is yours. Kiwan bowed slightly. Thank you. I know many of you are frightened, confused, angry, perhaps. You invited humanity to join your community, and instead of simple verification, you encountered something that hurt your telepaths. Something that made you question whether humans belong here at all. He paused, looking around at the assembled representatives. So, let me tell you a story. It's very old, from my homeland. There was once a woman who lived in a village, at the foot of a mountain. She was kind and worked hard, but she had no children, which made her sad. One day, she found a strange egg in the forest. She took it home and kept it warm, and eventually, a creature hatched from it. It was half human, half tiger. Some of the council members shifted uncomfortably. A story about a creature that was half predator? This was what he'd come to tell them? Kiwan continued. The woman raised the creature as her own child, feeding it and teaching it. But as it grew, the tiger child became dangerous. It was too strong. Its instincts were too wild. Eventually, it hurt people, even though it didn't mean to. The woman had to make a choice: protect the village or protect her child. He paused again. In the story, the woman transforms the tiger child into something new. Not fully human, not fully tiger, but something in between. Something that could live in both worlds. The child became a guardian of the mountain, protecting the village from real threats while learning to control its dangerous nature. This is a children's story? Asked a council member, their translator rendering their shock clearly. Yes, Kiwan said simply. We tell it to children. Do you understand why? Silence fell across the chamber. Finally, silence between stars spoke for the first time in thousands of years. Their voice was like wind through distant trees, like the sound of stars burning in the void. To teach them that nature is both beautiful and dangerous, that creatures can be gentle and fierce, that survival requires transformation. Exactly, Kiwan said, bowing toward the ancient observer. We tell children these stories, not to frighten them, but to prepare them. Because on our world, these are truths they need to know. Ambassador Kelleth leaned forward. But why must children know such dark things? Why not let them be innocent? Innocence is a luxury, Bomi said from her seat, her voice hard. On Earth, innocence gets you killed. We teach our children about danger because the danger is real. We teach them about death because people die. We teach them about pain because life is painful. But we also teach them that you can survive all of it and still find reasons to smile. Yuna, the psychologist, stood up next. You're asking the wrong question. You're asking why we expose children to darkness. But we're not exposing them to anything. The darkness is already there. It exists whether we talk about it or not. So we talk about it. We give children context, tools, understanding. We tell them that scary things exist. And we also tell them that humans have always found ways to overcome the scary things. But at what cost? Vrin's voice echoed through the chamber, coming from their damaged crystal form. Your minds are scarred by this knowledge. Every human I touched carried trauma like it was normal. Memories of loss, pain, fear, all sitting there in the background of every thought. Dae-sung stood up slowly. He'd been silent until now, but he couldn't stay quiet anymore. Yes, he said simply. We carry those things. But we also carry other things. Hope, joy, love, determination. We carry everything together. You can't have one without the other. He stepped forward, moving to stand beside Ki-won. When you scanned my mind, you saw me remembering my childhood. You saw me remembering the streets of Seoul, the games I played, the stories my grandmother told. And those memories disturbed you, because they contained knowledge of danger. But that's only half of what I remember. Images appeared on his datapad, and he projected them into the chamber. Pictures of Earth, his family smiling around a dinner table, children playing in a park, a festival with lights and music and laughter. I also remember my mother making soup when I was sick. I remember my father teaching me to ride a bicycle. I remember my friends and our stupid jokes. I remember falling in love for the first time. I remember watching the sunrise and thinking the world was beautiful. His voice was steady, calm. You saw the darkness in my memories and assumed that was all there was. But humans don't survive by dwelling on darkness. We survive by carrying light through it. Hana stood up next. Every species here has its own challenges, its own history. But most of you evolved on worlds where survival was easier, where resources were abundant, where your species didn't have to fight for every generation. That's not better or worse than Earth. It's just different, and it created different minds. But what happens when your species faces real hardship? Asked a council member, a floating being made of crystallized gas. What happens when humans encounter a true threat? Will all that darkness in your minds take over? Will you become the predators your evolution shaped you to be? Bomi laughed, and the sound was sharp in the formal chamber. You think we haven't faced hardship? You think we haven't encountered threats? We've been facing both since before we could speak. And yes, sometimes we fight. Sometimes we're aggressive. Sometimes we do terrible things. But you know what we do after? We rebuild. We help the survivors. We create treaties and laws and systems to prevent it from happening again. We don't just survive, we improve. Silence between stars descended from the ceiling, floating down to the chamber floor. When they spoke again, everyone listened. I have watched the Empire grow for 10,000 years. I have seen 847 species join our community. All of them came from gentle worlds. All of them evolved in relative peace. This was not a conscious choice. It was simply that we could not understand species from harsher places. We met them, found them too different, too disturbing, and we moved on. The ancient being turned their attention to the human delegation. But comfort is not strength. Ease is not wisdom. In 10,000 years, the Empire has never faced true adversity because we built our civilization to avoid it. We have no wars because we've forgotten how to struggle. We have no conflict because we've never had to fight for anything that mattered. They gestured toward Dae-sung. When our telepaths touched this human's mind, they did not just see his memories. They saw what we have lost. The will to persist when everything fails. The courage to hope when hope seems impossible. The strength to carry both darkness and light, and not let either one destroy you. Ambassador Kelleth stood up, his scales pale. Are you suggesting that we need humans? That our civilization is weak without them? I'm suggesting that diversity makes us stronger, Silence Between Stars said. And we have been limiting our diversity to only those species we find comfortable, only those minds we find easy to read. What else have we missed by avoiding the difficult things? Ki-won smiled gently. You don't need to scan our minds to verify our intentions. You can watch our actions instead. Give us tasks. Give us challenges. See how we respond. Judge us by what we do, not by what frightens you about how we think. Vrin's crystal form pulsed with light. But how can we trust beings whose thoughts are so alien to us? How can we build peace with a species we cannot understand? Rins. The same way you build anything worthwhile, Daesung said. One day at a time. One action at a time. One choice at a time. Trust isn't something you verify with a single scan. Trust is something you build through experience, through keeping promises, through showing up when it matters. He looked around at all the council members. You're afraid of us. I understand that. We're afraid too. We're a young species joining something massive and ancient. We don't know all your customs. We don't understand all your technology. We're going to make mistakes. But we're also going to try our best. We're going to be honest. We're going to work hard. And we're going to prove, through our actions. The chamber was quiet for a long moment. Then, one council member spoke up. A being that looked like living crystal. What if we created a new protocol? No telepathic scanning for humanity. Instead, a probationary period. 5 years of observation. 5 years of working together on small projects. 5 years to prove themselves through deeds, not thoughts. Another member agreed. It would be unprecedented. But perhaps unprecedented is what we need. The debate began again. But this time, it was different. Less fearful, more thoughtful. The council was beginning to understand that rejecting humanity wasn't solving the problem. It was just avoiding it. Finally, Silence Between Stars spoke one last time. I propose we accept humanity into the Empire under modified terms. No telepathic verification, but enhanced observation. Give them chances to prove themselves. And give ourselves the chance to learn from them. Who knows? Perhaps they will teach us something we've forgotten, how to face the difficult things instead of running from them. The vote was called. It wasn't unanimous. Several council members still voted against humanity's admission, but the majority agreed to try. Humanity would join the Galactic Harmony Empire as its 848th member species. Different from all the others. Frightening to some, but part of the community nonetheless. Daesung felt tears in his eyes as the result was announced. Hana grabbed his hand and squeezed. Bomi allowed herself a small smile. They'd done it. Not in the way they'd planned, but they'd done it. The hard part, they all knew, would be proving they deserved this chance. The new treaty took 2 weeks to write. It was longer than the standard version, filled with special clauses and observation protocols that had never been used before. Humanity would join the Empire, but under watch. There would be quarterly reviews, joint projects with other species to build trust, regular reports on human activities within Empire space. Daesung read through every line carefully. Some parts felt insulting, like they were being treated as children who needed supervision. But he understood the fear behind the words. The Empire was taking a risk on humanity. They had a right to protect themselves. Are you sure about this? Hana asked him on the night before the signing ceremony. They sat in the observation lounge, watching ships come and go from the station. These terms are pretty restrictive. Earth might not like them. Earth will understand, Daesung said. We're the newcomers here. We have to earn our place. He smiled slightly. Besides, once they see what humans can do, those restrictions will disappear on their own. The ceremony was scheduled for the next morning. This time, there would be no telepaths present. Just witnesses. Just words and signatures and hope that this would work. But first, there was someone Daesung needed to talk to. He found High Telepath Vrin in one of the station's meditation chambers, a room filled with soft light and the sound of distant water. Their crystalline form still bore the cracks from their encounter with his mind. The damage had been repaired as much as possible, but the marks remained. Scars that would never fully heal. "I'm sorry," Daesung said quietly as he entered. "I never meant to hurt you." Vryn turned toward him, their light pulsing softly. "I know. That is what made it so frightening. You were not trying to harm us. You were simply being yourself, and yourself was enough to break us. Is it okay that I'm here? I don't want to cause you more pain. Your presence does not hurt me now," Vryn said. "I am not touching your mind. I am simply sharing space with you." They were quiet for a moment. "I have been thinking about what happened, about what I saw in your memories." "What did you see?" Daesung asked. "I mean, I know you saw my childhood. But what about it scared you so much?" Vryn's light dimmed slightly. "It was not fear. Not exactly. It was recognition of something I had never encountered before. Your mind contained knowledge of death, of loss, of pain. But it also contained acceptance of these things. Not resignation. Not despair. Just acknowledgement that they exist, and life continues anyway." They moved closer to Daesung, though still keeping distance. "In my species, when we encounter death, it is always traumatic, always world-changing. We cannot simply accept it and move forward. But in your memories, I saw a child who knew that people die, who had lost people he loved, and who still got up every morning and found reasons to be happy. I could not understand how that was possible." "It's not always easy," Daesung admitted. "Sometimes it's really hard. But what's the alternative? Give up? Stop living because bad things happen?" He shook his head. "Humans tried that sometimes. Throughout our history. It never worked. The only way forward is forward." "Your species is very brave," Vryn said softly. "I don't think it's bravery," Daesung replied. "I think it's just stubbornness. We're too stupid to know when to quit." Vryn made a sound that might have been laughter. "Perhaps that is what bravery is. Being too stubborn to quit, even when quitting makes sense." They stood together in silence for a while. Then Vryn said, "I wanted to apologize to you as well. I probed deeper into your mind than I should have. I was confused by what I was sensing, and I went looking for context, without your permission. That was wrong of me." "It's okay," Daesung said. "You were just trying to do your job. My job hurt you nonetheless. It violated your privacy. It exposed your memories to scrutiny. They were never meant to endure." Vryn's cracks seemed to pulse with something like shame. "And then I called you an abomination. I broadcast that word to everyone present. That was cruel. You also called me beautiful," Daesung pointed out. "I heard that part too. Because you are," Vryn said. "Terrible and beautiful. Dark and light. Strong and fragile. Your species is a contradiction that should not exist. And yet you do. You thrive. You create art and music and laughter in a universe that tried very hard to kill you. That is beautiful, even if it is also frightening." They moved toward the door together. "Will you come to the ceremony tomorrow?" Daesung asked. "I will," Vryn said. "I want to witness this moment. The moment humanity truly joins the galaxy. It is historic, even if it is also terrifying. Our quote, our quote, our quote, our quote, our quote, our quote, our quote. We'll try not to be too scary," Daesung promised with a small smile. "Please don't," Vryn replied. "I think the galaxy could use a little fear. We've been comfortable for too long." The signing ceremony the next morning was simple. No telepaths, no mind scans. Just Daesung and Ambassador Kelleth standing on opposite sides of a table, with the treaty displayed between them and witnesses from dozens of species watching. Elder Kiwon stood nearby, along with Bomi, Hana, and Yuna. Silence between stars floated overhead. A silent observer, as always. High Telepath Vryn stood at the edge of the room, their cracked crystal form catching the light. "Before we sign," Ambassador Kelleth said, "I want to say something. You have made us question assumptions we've held for thousands of years. This has not been comfortable. He paused, looking at Daesung directly. But perhaps comfort is not what we needed. Perhaps we needed to remember that the universe is larger and stranger than our small corner of it. That there are other ways to think, other ways to be, other paths to wisdom. You have reminded us of this. Even if the lesson was painful, Daesung bowed slightly. We're honored to be here. We're grateful for this chance. We know we're different. We know we're difficult. But we promise to work hard, to be honest, and to prove that we can be trusted. Then, let us begin this journey together, Keleth said. They both signed the treaty. Digital and physical copies, in multiple languages and formats. The official moment when humanity became the 848th member of the Galactic Harmony Empire. Applause filled the chamber. Not from everyone, but from enough. It was a start. The first few months were hard. Humanity was given small projects to prove themselves, setting up a trade route between Earth and a nearby agricultural world, helping to catalog a newly discovered asteroid belt, participating in scientific conferences where human researchers could share their knowledge. Every project was monitored, every interaction was watched. Some species welcomed the humans warmly. Others kept their distance, still unsure about these strange beings whose minds were too dangerous for telepaths. But humans did what humans do best. They worked hard. They stayed stubborn. They kept showing up even when it was uncomfortable. And then came the crisis. A distress call came from Telos 4, a water world that was home to 30 million beings. A massive storm system had formed in their southern ocean, larger than anything they'd ever seen. It was moving toward their major population centers, and their weather control systems had failed. They were predicting catastrophic flooding, with potentially hundreds of thousands of casualties. The Empire's response was slow. They had protocols for disasters, but they were theoretical. Most Empire worlds were stable, with mild weather and few natural threats. The species living there had never developed robust emergency response systems because they'd never needed them. But humans had. Daesung was in a planning meeting with other Empire representatives when the distress call came through, while everyone else was still processing the information, trying to figure out which committee should handle it. Which protocols to follow? Who had authority to make decisions? Daesung was already pulling up data on Telos 4, population density, infrastructure maps, elevation charts, potential evacuation routes. We need to mobilize now, he said, interrupting the debate about proper procedures. Every minute we wait, that storm gets closer to their cities. But we need authorization from the Disaster Response Council, one representative said. We need to file proper requests. We need to coordinate with. There's no time for that. Bomi cut in. She'd joined the meeting as soon as she heard about the crisis. I've seen storms like this. On Earth, we call them hurricanes. If this one is as big as their readings suggest, it's going to hit those cities in less than 48 hours. We need ships, supplies, and personnel moving right now. But who will coordinate it? Who will make the decisions? Another representative asked. Clearly overwhelmed. We will, Hannah said. She had charts pulled up on her datapad, already planning. Humans have experience with this kind of disaster. Let us help. There was chaos in the meeting. Some wanted to follow proper procedure. Some were afraid of letting humans take charge. Some couldn't process the urgency of the situation because they'd never faced anything like it before. Ambassador Keleth made the decision. Do it. Earth delegation. You have authority to coordinate the emergency response. We will handle the political fallout later. Number men, 200. The next 48 hours were a blur of organized chaos. The human delegation contacted Earth, got emergency response experts on video calls. They coordinated with Telos 4's government, who were grateful for someone who seemed to know what to do. They mobilized Empire ships, directing them where to go, what supplies to bring, how to set up evacuation centers. Bomi took charge of the evacuation operations, her military experience making her perfect for logistics under pressure. Hana managed communications, keeping everyone informed in real time. Yuna handled the psychological aspect, preparing crisis counselors for traumatized survivors. And Dae-sung coordinated everything, making decisions quickly, adjusting plans as new information came in, never hesitating, even when the stakes were enormous. The storm hit exactly when predicted. But by then, most of the coastal population had been evacuated to higher ground. Emergency supplies were in place. Medical teams were ready. The damage was still significant, but the casualties were minimal. Thousands were saved who would have died if the Empire had followed its usual procedures. When it was over, when the storm had passed, and the rebuilding could begin, Dae-sung stood in the operations center and finally let himself breathe. He hadn't slept in 2 days. His hands were shaking from exhaustion and stress. Ambassador Kelleth found him there. "How did you know what to do? How did you move so quickly?" "2. Dae-sung laughed tiredly. "We've dealt with disasters like this before. Hurricanes, earthquakes, tsunamis. We've practiced emergency response so many times it's automatic now." He looked at Kelleth with exhausted eyes. "On Earth, we call this Tuesday." 2. The joke didn't quite translate, but Kelleth understood the meaning. For humans, disasters were normal. Tragedy was expected, and they'd built entire systems around surviving it, around helping each other through it, around rebuilding after. Word spread quickly through the Empire. The humans had proven themselves, not through military might or technological superiority, but through experience with hardship, through the ability to move quickly in a crisis, through the willingness to help when others needed it most. The quarterly reviews became less strict. The observation protocols were quietly relaxed. More species began reaching out to humanity, wanting to learn from them, wanting to understand how they faced difficult things with such determination. 6 months after the treaty was signed, High Telepath Vryn visited Dae-sung one last time before the humans returned to Earth. "I wanted to thank you," Vryn said. "For what?" "For teaching us something important, for showing us that our comfortable galaxy was missing something vital." Their crystalline form still bore its cracks, but now they seemed less like damage and more like decoration. "We built a civilization that avoided hardship, that ran from anything difficult. We thought that was wisdom. But you showed us it was just fear." "And now?" Dae-sung asked. "Now we're learning to be braver. Learning that sometimes the difficult things are worth facing. Learning that carrying darkness doesn't mean you can't also carry light." Dae-sung smiled. "That's all we ever wanted. Just a chance to show you who we really are." As the human delegation prepared to leave the station, to return to Earth with news of their success, Dae-sung looked back one last time at the aliens who had become colleagues, and some of them friends. The galaxy had been frightened of humanity's darkness, but now they were beginning to see the light humans carried too. The hope that persisted despite hardship, the kindness that survived through cruelty, the determination to keep building even when everything fell apart. Humanity had joined the galaxy. And slowly, carefully, the galaxy was learning what that meant. Not a species of warriors or predators, not monsters hiding behind smiles, just people who'd learned to survive in a harsh universe and refused to let that survival make them cruel. Just humans, carrying both darkness and light, and trying their best to do good with both. And maybe, just maybe, that was exactly what the galaxy needed.